Good morning, everyone. I'm Peggy Brekenridge, and I'm here as the mayor of Tiny Township to share my perspectives on the North Simcoe landfill site, popularly known as Site 41, which was slated to be constructed in my township, the township of Tiny. Today I intend to address the following. First of all, what the thesis of what I mean by the politics of water. Just to give you a little background on the structure of local government, local municipal government. And then on to the North Simcoe landfill site, some information where it fits in on the township of Tiny, and then the long road from farmland to landfill and back to farmland. And just a little note on that my council did pass on this past Monday night. We finally passed the bylaw to revert the site back to agriculture. So it was a very happy day for all of us. And then I will do a summary, and then if anyone has any questions. I chose the title, The Politics of Water, because in many ways the story of Site 41 reflects what I believe is a growing phenomena around the world. It may well reflect the opinion of many futurists that water is fast becoming the new oil, a source of wealth, power, and supremacy for those who have it, and the object of envy and perhaps aggression for those who don't. Webster's dictionary defines politics as the science of government. Wikipedia defines politics as a process by which groups of people make collective decisions. Water is a basic necessity of life. Water accounts for about 65% of our body weight. Losing as little as 12% of it can kill us. Drinking contaminated water, as we know, can also be deadly. Water is essential not only for survival, but also for our livelihood. Irrigation was used to increase crop yields as far back as 5000 BC. Masonry sewers and water flush toilets dating back to 2750 BC have been discovered by archaeologists. Water has played a special role in Canada's history. The fur trade was dependent on water for transportation. Water-powered grist mills and sawmills, such as those that were owned by my great-great-great-grandfather, George Copeland, in my own township in the mid-1800s. This led to the production and export of two economic staples, grain and lumber. As industry diversified, water was put to use as a coolant, as a solvent, as a dispersant, and a source of hydroelectric energy. It's used as a raw material in the manufacture of chemicals, drugs, beverages, and hundreds of other products. And of course, we depend on water for personal hygiene to flush away our waste products. Most applications consume some of the water, so less is returned to the source than was taken out. The water that is put back is often degraded. As time goes on, more and more water users compete for what remains of the same finite supply. Canada, with less than 0.5% of the world's population, is home to roughly 7% of the world's supply of renewable fresh water. With over 1 million lakes, including part ownership of the Great Lakes and massive ice fields, Canada has the third largest water supply in the world. At the same time, 1 in 5 people in the world are reportedly without access to safe drinking water. Is it any wonder that water plays a central role in some of the world's hottest political debates then today? From the US-Mexican border to the Middle East. And on a much scale, is it any wonder that the politics of water became a defining issue in the battle to prevent the location of a landfill site in our backyard in Tiny Township? This is the central thesis of my talk today. I just want to take a moment to explain the structure of government, and I may be explaining something that many of you know, but if a number of you are like me, when I first got into politics 7 years ago, I really did not know the difference between the politicians and the administrators and the bureaucrats. I came out of the business world, and I really wasn't interested in government. It was just there. I paid my taxes like everybody else. But if you look at the slide up there, as you know, we have the federal government, the provincial government, and then at the municipal level, we have a county, an upper tier and a lower tier. Not all municipalities in Ontario have two tiers. And by the way, there are 444 municipalities in Ontario. Tiny Council is comprised of a mayor, a deputy mayor, and 3 councillors. We all have 1 vote. As the mayor of Tiny Township, I also sit as a councillor at the county, Simcoe County, but I'm not here today to represent them. Simcoe County Council is comprised of the mayors and deputy mayors of each of 16 municipalities that are in the county of Simcoe. And the warden of Simcoe County is chosen each year by council from among its members to chair and act as head of council. Simcoe County, among a long list of responsibilities, is charged with waste management within its borders. Just to note that at county, we also have 1 vote as well, unless there is a recorded vote. And at county, the recorded votes are a weighted vote, and the weighted vote is dependent on the number of voters in each municipality. So the township of Tiny, while having the name Tiny in it, is not necessarily small, as you'll hear later. Tiny is actually quite large. Our permanent population is just over 10,000, but we have 63% in addition to that who are cottagers. So they are all voters. So we have just under 20,000 voters, which makes us larger in vote count at the county than many of our neighbors. So between my deputy mayor, who sits on my council, and myself, we actually have 10 votes. The township of Tiny is the most northerly of 16 municipalities within the county of Simcoe. It's located in the southern Georgian Bay region of south central Ontario. It occupies an area of 344 square kilometers on the Penetang-Wisheen Peninsula, with 70 kilometers of coastline on Georgian Bay. And I think this is important. It's important when we view where the site for Site 41 was located, that we are essentially a peninsula sticking out into Georgian Bay. We are surrounded by over 70 kilometers of very special water. Georgian Bay is if any of you haven't been there, it's a beautiful cottagers paradise, recreational paradise. It's north of us, leads into the 30,000 Island, which is one of the most beautiful areas in the world. So it's very precious, and it's no wonder that such a long battle ensued, putting a site located in an area that is so close to the water. The southern boundary of Tiny Township, it's about 16 kilometers long. It abuts Springwater Township and the town of Wasaga Beach. And I'm sure you've all heard of the famous beaches at Wasaga Beach. The eastern boundary, 17 kilometers long, marks the western boundary of Tay Township. The township skirts the municipalities of Midland and Penetang. We are often known as the 4 municipalities, and we're often clumped together: Midland, Penetang, Wisheen, Tiny, and Tay. I also want to mention, just going back to the structure of the council, I meant to mention this, that it's also important to note that in rural municipalities, the mayor, the deputy mayors, and all the council members are part-time. They're not full-time, and the majority of council members, particularly at the county, have full-time regular jobs. So the being part of a council is really doing your community service, as most of them do have secondary jobs. And the pay is not high enough to have anyone as a full-time, because you wouldn't be able to live on it. It's very minimal. Unlike, I'm sure, the mayors in the larger centers, I know Toronto and I know Barrie, Orillia, London, they have full-time mayors, and most of them have full-time council members as well. But for us in Simcoe County, we're a rural area and everyone is part-time, with most people having other full-time jobs. In Tiny Township, our strategic plan defines us as an environmentally focused, diverse family of communities, providing a healthy lifestyle for its residents and visitors alike. Our guiding principles encompass the environment first, culture and heritage, recreation, our shorelines, and municipal administration. So you can see that environment and our shorelines is something that's very, very important to us whenever we are developing our policies. In 1979, well before Simcoe County was given the responsibility for waste management, the municipalities of Tiny Tay, Midland, and Penetanguishene began the search for a new landfill site to service the region. The North Simcoe landfill site, Site 41, a 50-acre parcel of farmland in the southernmost region of Tiny Township, was selected as the preferred site in 1986. In 1995, waste management responsibility passed to the county. One of their early tasks was to remediate the large number of landfill sites within their boundaries, which had been poorly designed and maintained under the various township management. Another task was to plan for future garbage handling requirements within the county. They attacked this job on a number of fronts. Over the following years, they implemented a recycling blue box program, hazardous waste diversion, a special brush and yard waste collection program, an organics diversion, green box program, as well as public education programs built around the reduce, reuse, recycle mantra. It also fell to them, however, to pick up the plans for Site 41. In spite of the ultimate success of their diversion programs, county staff remained convinced that a new landfill site would be required to replace existing sites which were reaching capacity. Over the 1990 to 1993 period, a number of alternative sites were evaluated. Site 41 remained the preferred location. A provisional certificate of approval for Site 41 was granted by the Ontario Ministry of the Environment in 1998, and the county began land purchases. Final approval was granted by the MOE in 2006, and on June 26, 2007, County Council voted to proceed with initial site preparation. In December 2008, the MOE granted a permit to take water, and cell construction began in the spring of 2009. So far, the process appeared, from the county's point of view, to be working as it should. Planners had identified the need for new landfill capacity. Garbage needed to go somewhere. Alternative disposal methods had been evaluated. Alternative sites had been identified. Engineers, hydrogeologists, and a host of other experts had filed their reports. The site had been designed using the most modern technology to meet the most demanding requirements for the protection of the environment. Successful recycling and diversion programs had been implemented to minimize the amount of solid waste destined for landfill. Separation programs were in place to minimize the toxicity of garbage to be deposited in Site 41. Peer reports were conducted. Periodic updates were presented to elected representatives at County Council and votes taken for approval to proceed with construction. Reams of data were submitted in support of the very demanding applications for approval by the Ministry of the Environment. Glossy brochures were distributed to keep citizens informed of the process. Public meetings were held to solicit input earlier in the process. I'm going to show you some of the, I'm going to just mention some of the technical data that was provided to County Council. Yeah, I'm not going to go through it all, but I did tell Bill that I would leave him all of this. These are reports from Henderson, Padden and Associates, a response to the MOE comments concerning development and operations report. Another one, response to Dixon hydrogeology comments concerning development and operations reports. These are some of the peer reviews that were done. I'm just going to go to some of the others here at the back first. This is all the monitoring data. Now, this is not for every year. They've just given me a sample of what was done. This is the 2009 data. Here we have another one, Consolidated Development and Operations Report for Site 41. Lots of data there, if anyone wishes to or needs it for their research. Another big report, the County of Simcoe Landfill Site 41 Revised Supplemental Hydrogeological and Geotechnical Investigation. These are done by Jaeger Hims Limited, who was the the engineering firm who was building the site, designing and building the site. Here's another 2006 monitoring summary report, County of Simcoe Landfill Site 41. 2007 monitoring summary report. This was done for most years, the monitoring summary report. County of Simcoe Landfill Site 41, hydrogeological and geotechnical aspects, response to Dixon Hydrogeology Limited comments. These were the responses from the peer reviews. And we go on and on and on. So there was reams of data done, reams of data like this were shown to the county councilors to say, we have all the facts. The technology is there. We are showing you that this site will be safe. A community monitoring committee was established to act as a liaison between county government and citizens. Construction contracts had been let, all the pieces were in place to move in the heavy equipment and begin construction in the spring of 2009. Okay, I'm now going to show you, the county did prepare, as I mentioned, glossy brochures, videos, and so on, again to reassure people that their site was going to be safe. So this video that Terry's putting in, it's about 13 minutes long. Rob McCullough is the commenter on this video, and he is the manager of environmental science and was the one who was overseeing Site 41. So we'll take a minute and let you see some of the
other areas where the county's motto for the greater good has more significance. Rob McCullough, the county's director of environmental services, explains.
We've learned how to best fill sites. What we need to do is really minimize the amount of waste that's going in that can be diverted. The county has really become one of the leaders in North America, certainly in Ontario, in our waste management practices. We've got probably the most diversion programs I'm certainly aware of in North America. Our residents have that available to them to certainly be able to, on an individual basis, probably divert 80% of the waste that they produce. We believe that we're at the point where we're at 60% waste diversion overall, really putting us as one of the leaders in North America. We've developed some very specific programs at facilities that have been able to not only create space from old poor practices, but make better use of that material when it is going in the landfill. And what I'm talking about there is some of our remediation programs where we've had to actually physically pick up the waste that was not placed on a good liner. We actually run that waste through a screening plant, recovering a very good portion of that as a fine sort of sand type material that we're able to reuse as cover material rather than having to waste sand or other material at our facilities. Residents of the county are going to be pretty familiar with the type of material they can place in their blue box. Less so are they familiar with the type of waste that we can divert at our waste facilities, because there's a much larger amount of material that can normally be taken away and not be reduced into or not be disposed as garbage. So items that people will put in their blue box certainly can be diverted at our facilities for them. Cardboard, we try and keep a little separate because we've got a different way of dealing with it here. But things like shingles, drywall, building wood waste, brush that people produce in their own backyard, tires, scrap metal, and fridges. So basically we do divert a huge variety of materials that is well described on the county's website. But at our facility, if you're unsure, we want you to ask as soon as you get up to the scale, and the people at the scale will try and help you decide what material in your load can be diverted. County of Simcoe has been very proactive in diverting waste from landfill. It's very difficult to develop new landfill capacity. It's very difficult to look at other options that are available for that type of garbage. So our best option is to minimize the amount of waste that we have to deal with as garbage, and it's best for the environment as well. County Council's been very, very supportive in letting staff come up with some new ideas, trying to be very innovative and looking at the type of waste that we deal with and trying to look at ways that we can divert the majority of waste. So our very recently introduced curbside organics program takes a lot of the kitchen waste out of the waste stream. Not only does that have the benefit of saving us landfill capacity, the amount of material that we need to put in our facilities, it actually reduces the strength of that leachate, the water that comes into contact with waste. It's very interesting to find that it's that kitchen waste that actually causes some of the worst problems at the site. Removing it saves that capacity and reduces the toxicity of the materials that's actually in the landfill site itself. We add that with some other diversion programs that we've been working on at the landfill, things like household hazardous waste. So if you have paint or oils or fluorescent light tubes, those sort of things obviously can cause problems with the environment. So by diverting them, we take away from the capacity, increase the capacity at the site by not having to treat that material as a garbage, as well as reducing the toxicity of what's going into the site. Electronics is very similar. Computers, monitors, televisions, they have a lot of heavy metals in the solder that actually goes into the circuit boards. And our new program to actually take all that material and keep it from going into the site has seen thousands and thousands of tons all being reduced and diverted from the landfill to go to a better environmental source, where a lot of those materials that were causing us problems, were causing toxics, are actually being reused, therefore reducing the impact on the environment. Site 41, we also call the North Simcoe landfill site, has some natural protective features already in place. That makes it much more advantageous to develop a landfill site there, rather than in a location where we don't have the choice, when we're remediating and fixing problems that we've had in the past. This site, Site 41, has a very thick layer of natural clay. We don't need to import clay to develop the liner. That clay is already in place. In fact, the clay underneath the liner is as thick as 12 meters in some places, but the minimum is already over 3 meters. We also have something at the site called upward gradients. The water at the site actually wants to come to the surface. We don't want the natural groundwater coming into the site, so that's one of the other reasons that we've actually put in the HDPE plastic liner. That plastic liner will reduce the amount of water that's actually coming into the site, while at the same time being one of the very strong protective features that allows that leachate that's in the site to be collected. At modern landfills, including Site 41, including many of the sites that the county has already remediated, what we do is we put up a monitoring network of groundwater wells. What that allows us to do is to ensure that the groundwater in the area is not being impacted by the landfill site. What we do is set up wells right next to the facility and wells further out at our property boundaries, so that if we do find that there's any concern with groundwater that's happening at the site, we have a long time to figure out the reason for that before it actually leaves our site. Groundwater moves relatively slowly, and so we would have a much longer time to be able to deal with it. We also have a stormwater treatment pond, so that fresh water that falls on the site, the edges of the site, and falls into our ditches, goes through a natural treatment system before it actually goes into any stormwater management system, stormwater ponds, any off-site streams, and we have that opportunity to monitor it before it goes off as well. The wells at the site are actually checked continuously for some things like water level. We want to make sure that we continue to have that upward gradient pressure that we've had over the 20 plus years of monitoring that we've done. One of the things the Ministry of the Environment has done is request that we install constant monitoring network system to ensure that that happens. We will also be coming in and checking at least 4 times a year many of the different groundwater qualities around the site to ensure that the site is in compliance with the way it's meant to be operated. The groundwater and the surface water are the most protected by a landfill site in Ontario. That's what the county's consultants and the county staff truly believe. We have a very modern engineered landfill site that uses both engineered protective systems, naturally protective systems, and the fail-safe of a very constant check and monitoring system to make sure that those natural and engineered systems are working the way they are intended. This is the Oro landfill site, and what we have is some leftover pieces from our modern engineered landfill development. Piece of pipe I'm holding is one of the HDPE plastic leachate collection pipe. The water that's come into contact with waste under the site turns into what we call leachate as it picks up material from the waste, and we want to make sure that we can remove it from the site. So you have this very thick-walled plastic pipe that we place underneath the garbage, but above the liner to pick up that water, that leachate that comes through the facility. There's holes down the side of the pipe to allow that in, and actually this is buried within the gravel layer. So there's about close to a meter thick of gravel that this leachate pipe's at the bottom of, picking up any of that leachate that may come through the site. This is quite a thing that we've actually had to train our staff how to weld this. There's a specific welder because these can only come in certain lengths, and it's so thick. We have to actually come with a specific welder to put the pipes together on site. This is a section of the plastic high-density polyethylene liner that we actually utilize at the bottom of our landfill site to provide protection for the groundwater above the clay. It's a very thick, sturdy plastic. It's quite thick. It's only when it gets it into the sun does it become somewhat movable, and this has been sitting out in the sun. It gets it to the point that it can actually bend a little bit for us. What we do with this when we're down in the cell is we lay it out in strips. You can see each strip's probably 30 feet long, 10 meters, and what we do is overlap them on the edges. What we do with those overlaps is we actually run a weld, 2 welds in fact, down the side, okay? So that both the overlap is overlapped and is double welded. We then are able to put some air in the middle, and we can then pressure test it to make sure that the welds are holding, and we do that with each and every section of the HDPE plastic as it's worked. Many tests are done on the tensile strength, the type of strength, and like you know, maybe working with plastics yourself, it's built with that ability to actually form into problem areas. Let's say that there was a small cavity below it in the site because no base can be perfectly constructed. Well, the plastic is fine and can actually elongate probably for every 10 centimeters, another 10 centimeters. It's able to actually flex in that way, and it's designed for that. We don't want that as much as possible, so we try and make sure that the base is as perfect as we can get it before we put this on, but we know when we put this on that it can and will conform to irregularities with the base. It's going to happen no matter what. This is only one of many engineered features that goes into the design of the base. We got to remember this is being put on top of very, very thick clay. And in the case of the North Simcoe landfill site, Site 41, we have those upward gradients that are happening as well. So water already doesn't move very fast through the clay, under 2 centimeters a year when it's coming up. So we've used a great number of different protective techniques, both natural and engineered, that work together in harmony to make sure that the groundwater resources are protected all over the site. What we're seeing in front of us here is actually this site's leachate collection tank. So the water that's coming into contact with waste underneath the liner is actually picking up that leachate, right? The liner system, the leachate collection system's picking up that leachate. It's going into pumps that are located beside the site and coming up here in pipes and actually filling this tank. When we have the tankers then come in, depending on how much rain there's been or depending on what time of year it is, but as few as 1 or 2 a week or as many as 8 to 10 a day, depending if the worst time is right after snow melt. And therefore we believe the site will be the most protective site in Ontario for ensuring groundwater and surface water resources are protected.
I was sitting there, I noticed that this thing can go down, so maybe I can just, it felt rather high. Just before I go on with the next slide, when I was talking about the structure of county and municipal townships, I realized I'd forgotten to mention the difference. Council members, who, as you know, are elected to set policy for either the county or the municipality. And the staff, or the administration, or the bureaucrats, as many of you call them, are there to implement the policy. They do all the work and all the research and all the details. And as council members, your role is not to get involved and tell the staff how to do their work. You just set the policy that this is to be done, or that is to be done, or we are to follow an environment first policy, for example. Okay, in the spring of 2009, everything was good to go. So what happened? I just wanted to also mention, I think that video was probably produced about 1.5 years ago. Oh, there had been resistance to the North Simcoe landfill site almost from the beginning, and many of the people are here today. Neighboring farmers were opposed to a landfill in their backyards, but who wouldn't be? This is according to the county. They managed to gain the sympathy of some of their friends and neighbors, and some groups farther afield who opposed landfills in general. They were vocal and persistent, holding meetings, putting up Stop Site 41 signs around the area, and bombarding their local township representatives with demands for action. While they couldn't be ignored, county considered them manageable. After all, it was just a small group of NIMBYs from a distant township. Tiny. We are in the north of the county. In a county run by 32 councillors representing 16 municipalities, 260,000 residents, excluding the separated cities of Barrie and Orillia, and with an annual budget of almost $500 million and over 1,600 full and part-time staff, Tiny Township was a bit of a backwater. Only 10,800 full-time residents, an annual budget of about $12 million, about 80 full and part-time employees, 2 representatives on county council. To the residents and their representatives of the 31 municipalities, particularly those in the more populous southern half of the county, who really cared. For nearly 20 years, Site 41 resistance remained a relatively local and isolated issue. Tiny Council repeatedly voiced the objections of residents to Site 41. But in Tiny Township, the council was always active in trying to fight against this site. As early as 1991, Tiny Township retained Mr. Harry Daum, a municipal solicitor, then of the law firm Gowling Strathy Henderson, as an advisor. In August of 1991, Mr. Daum was authorized to retain both a statistician and a hydrogeologist to review work done by the consultants used in the Site 41 environmental assessment. I just will bring your attention to what is on the slide here is that I had done some research and had gone back in all of our recordings at my council at Tiny Township, going back as far back as the records that we had. And I had asked my assistant to pull all of the information that pertained to Site 41. And interestingly enough, there was, from about 1991 right up to 2010, there may have been only 1 year, I think, that there wasn't some mention, or it didn't cross council's path at some time at all. So Tiny Township Council has been busy for at least 19 years and has been involved in either trying to stop the site or ensure that the site would be safe if it did go through. In January of 1992, Mr. Daum was requested to send a letter to the County Waste Management Committee asking that they obtain an independent legal opinion on the chances of pursuing Site 41 in hopes that unnecessary expenditures could be avoided. Now, didn't I get a laugh of that? Out of that one. $14 million later. And I think it's interesting to note that Tiny Council had asked in 1992 that they obtain an independent legal opinion on their chances of pursuing Site 41s in hopes that unnecessary expenditures could be avoided. So this question was asked of the Tiny Council 18 years ago, 18 years later, and $14 million later. Now, I thought that was a bad number, but I happened to be speaking to a planner who was coming into one of our Committee of Adjustment meetings last week, and I think somehow I must have mentioned that I was coming down to do this, and we were talking about that figure. He had been involved with the city as a planner, involved in an environmental assessment process for a landfill that was going to be going in for the City of Toronto. After spending over $85 million on the project was canceled then by the incoming Harris government. So it's interesting, and maybe some people say, well, that might be all right. Our son works for a pharmaceutical company, Pfizer, and he has told me that their company can spend up to $100 million in researching a drug that may never get to market. But somehow I don't think they're the same thing. In April 1992, Mr. Dom was authorized to act on behalf of the township in gathering information from the North Simcoe Waste Management Association regarding Site 41 selection process, as well as liaising with the Ministry of the Environment. In September 1992, a resolution was brought forward to send a letter to the Ministry of the Environment advising that the township continued to consider alternatives to landfill and asked that resources for waste minimization plans be made available as soon as possible. In July of 1995, Tiny Council passed a resolution reiterating their opposition to the establishment of a landfill site, their conviction of the fallacy of the process, their opinion that the Ontario Municipal Board had erroneously approved of Site 41, and their intent to continue their opposition to Site 41 through an appeal to the Conservative government of the day and/or the judicial process. Then we skip to 2003. Council that I was on and Mr. Miller was on at the time arranged for peer reviews of reports released by the County of Simcoe regarding Site 41 by Dixon Hydrogeology Limited, Severn Sound Environmental Association, which is our conservation authority in our area. It acts like a conservation authority, and Conestoga Rovers and Associates. Acting on the advice from Mr. Dom, who we retained again, an interim control bylaw was adopted in April 2005 to prohibit the use of lands, buildings, or structures for waste disposal, landfill, and related uses on lands legally described as Part Lots 10 and 11, Concession 2, Site 41. The interim bylaw was subsequently overturned by the Ontario Municipal Board in July 2006. The first vote at County for approval of funds to proceed with construction was scheduled for June 26, 2007. It was preceded, and I was on that council. I was elected to that council in the fall of 2006. That was my first time as a county councillor. It was preceded by a series of waste management workshops and tours to educate county councillors, many of them, including myself, newly elected in the fall of 2006. We discussed our options at my tiny council and arranged for one of our environmental lawyers who was familiar with the issues to prepare arguments opposing Site 41 for presentation prior to the vote. Naively, we first cleared this with County and agreed with their request for a copy of the presentation for distribution prior to the meeting. Following the presentation, a lawyer from the county, having had advance access to this presentation, proceeded to shred her arguments point by point. With no opportunity for a rebuttal and with no support from the prominent groups which only later joined the chorus of opposition, I was left feeling very much betrayed and alone. I might note that many of us, including myself, did have a chance to speak, but we were cut off, and early in the process of council, it's very difficult to know exactly what the proceedings are, something that for the next election, we'll talk later about what has, I guess, some of the good things that have come out of this whole process. And one is to give a much better orientation program to the new county councillors. But I still remember the feeling of being kicked in the stomach when I was expecting a good fulsome debate, and one of the county councillors stood up and said, "Enough. We've been talking about this for years and years now. Let's just call the vote." And when somebody calls the vote, which I learned that day, the debate stops and the vote had to be called. So the vote was called, and as you probably know, the vote was called. It was very, very, very close vote, but they called for a recorded vote, and we lost the vote at that time by a narrow margin. So at this stage, it looked like Site 41 was pretty much a done deal. While continuing to voice opposition to the site at county, I also felt that we needed to develop plans to mitigate any possible negative consequences of the site too tiny in a now likely event that it proceeded. I strongly believe that as elected representatives of the township, we owed our citizens a duty of prudence and must have plans in place to ensure that if the site was going to go forward, it would have to be as safe as possible. My efforts and persistence in this regard were interpreted by many, particularly by the Site 41 protesters and by some members of my council, as support for Site 41. It went so far as a lady that I knew at a social gathering, who I considered to be a friend, was taking casual conversation out of context and sending emails to Site 41 opponents proclaiming that I secretly supported the site because I was speaking openly about what needed to be done if and when the site moved forward. Is it any wonder then that politicians are reluctant to talk openly and honestly, to explore all and various options when their words can be so easily taken out of context, twisted and contorted? However, we persisted, and in July 2007, Tiny Council passed a resolution which, while again stating opposition to the initial site preparation work on landfill Site 41, requested the County of Simcoe to invest in recycling, to investigate alternative energy and 21st century waste management technologies, and to pursue the immediate development of a county-wide waste management strategic plan. Meanwhile, public opposition to the site began to gather steam. The MOE permit to take water in December 2008 and beginning of cell construction in the spring of 2009 seemed to galvanize more opposition. While concerns over water contamination had been on the table for some time, water was suddenly becoming the new battleground for Site 41. Okay, Ray's just given me the 5 minutes here, so I'm going to skip over this, this next section and go to slide 22.
You got started a little late.
Started at 10:02. How much time have I got left, Ray?
10 minutes.
Oh, 10 minutes, okay.
Plus your questions.
Oh, okay. The Walkerton tragedy in May 2000 brought water to the forefront in the minds of most Canadians. As unbelievable as it seemed, with our abundant resources of fresh, safe water, the unthinkable had happened. And because I am running out of time, I'm not going to go through this, but I think everybody remembers the tragedies at Walkerton with many, many people, 2,500 people becoming ill, 7 people died, and that really brought water to the forefront. And the inquiry, as you know, led to the information that the PUC employees were at fault. This then led to a number of more growing opposition. Our local MP, Garfield Dunlop, who you're going to hear from later today, visited Site 41 and subsequently reversed his earlier support, later filing a private member's bill with the Ontario government to halt any further development. Dr. William Schotok at the University of Heidelberg in Germany, and therefore someone with a high degree of credibility, joined the mounting opposition with studies showing water from beneath the site to be the cleanest groundwater on earth. A walk from Site 41 to Queen's Park was organized by local opponents, supported by First Nations leaders and other notable citizens. County councillors, as well as the public, were told time and time again that the site was highly engineered and used the most up-to-date technology. They were told that the site would be safe, that regulations now in place in Ontario ensure that landfills are built with every safeguard in place. With much of the organic material removed from the waste stream, there is much less decomposition, and as a result, much less leachate is produced. However, the best technology does not necessarily equal public acceptance. Still, the county persisted, and heavy equipment rolled onto the site to begin cell construction in the spring of 2009. The First Nations representatives joined local residents in the establishment of a protest camp outside of Site 41. The local Federation of Tiny Township Cottagers Associations joined the outcry and lent its support to organizing rallies against Site 41. The Council of Canadians was contacted by a local resident with contacts within the organization. Maud Barlow, the national chairperson of the Council of Canadians and board chair of the Washington-based Food and Water Watch, joined the protest. The David Suzuki Foundation received hundreds of emails about Site 41, and we were contacted by David Suzuki. Ralph Nader dropped in to show support for protesters. David Crombie, former mayor of Toronto, visited the site and spoke at a rally at the gates of Site 41. Protest marchers, arrests, interim injunctions, media coverage, talk show call-in programs. A fellow by the name of Goldhawk did a fabulous job. Emails from around the world to elected representatives began an avalanche of public opinion against the construction of a dump site on top of the cleanest groundwater on earth. All of these emails were directed to the county council members, and they received hundreds of them. Water, it seems, had finally touched a nerve which galvanized the public, creating awareness and unlocking a flood of opposition which had lain dormant for over 20 years. And I don't mean dormant for all the people in the room here who worked on it, but it was dormant really for the rest of the world. Public pressure for an end to Site 41 was reaching a boiling point. However, the county had MOE approval to proceed. The law was on their side. It seemed that the majority of county council was content to let the situation play out. But it was apparent to us that civil unrest was about to boil over. County council does not normally meet in July. So last July, I requested the warden, who chairs the county council and is my right as a county councillor to do, to call a special meeting of council to deal with the issue. My request was denied. A regular county council meeting was scheduled for August 25th, 2009, but there was little appetite to put Site 41 on the agenda. In the meantime, a conference of the Association of Municipalities of Ontario was held in Ottawa, an event which would be attended by most of Simcoe County councillors. For those 4 days, I made the rounds to those councillors, arguing the case for a vote on Site 41, arguing the merits of a halt to construction, taking straw polls in support and opposition, meeting with the ministry people, going back and twisting more arms. By the time the conference was over, I felt that I would have a slim margin at that county council meeting. Back home, tensions continued to mount. We worked the phone, strategized, spoke with numerous stakeholders, including the Council for Canadians, and prepared for the August 25th County Council meeting. On the day of the meeting, we were met by hundreds of protesters outside the county offices. Bedlam would be a mild way of describing the scene. Inside, as the meeting got underway, I stood to present a motion for a moratorium on construction. In an impassioned speech later described by Maud Barlow as just about as beautiful a speech as I had ever heard, I presented the case for suspension of further construction for a period of 1 year so that public release and independent review of all pertinent information concerning the environmental impacts of operating a waste facility at Site 41 can occur. Meaningful consultations take place with local residents and cottagers. First Nations groups and other organizations that have raised concerns about the environmental impacts of establishing a waste facility at Site 41, and that the suitability of Site 41 for waste management use be assessed in light of a source water protection planning mandated by the Clean Water Act. A number of county councillors, including the deputy mayor that works with me for Tiny, spoke in favor of the motion. Unlike our presentation at the meeting in June of 2007, support was strong and vocal. The vote in favor of a 1-year moratorium passed by a vote of 22 to 10. The following month, Council voted 26 to 3 in favor of discontinuing construction and development of Site 41. In May 2010, County Council voted to request the Ontario Ministry of the Environment to revoke the certificate of approval for Site 41. The North Simcoe landfill site was history. Have there been any benefits? What's next? Our citizens have certainly become more aware of the issues surrounding waste, spawning groups such as Zero Waste and focusing local governments on garbage reduction, diversion, and separation programs rather than disposal. Our citizens have become more aware of the importance of involvement and participation in public affairs. Spawning groups such as AWARE, this is a group that is newly formed in Simcoe County to make people more aware of their local governments and to get them to participate more, something that I think is very badly needed. And to have people take an active role in making sure that the people we elect to public office possess the character and the necessary skills to conduct the affairs of government in the best interests of the citizens they represent. The county has been working for the past year on developing a waste management strategy for handling of residential solid waste for the next 20 years. The strategy is to include both short and long-term disposal options to make further improvements to the county's waste diversion programs and to make progress towards zero waste. The county did finally listen to the people, and during the process they set up numerous public sessions where people could come and give their input. They set up a steering committee that included members of the public, representatives from the cities of Orillia and Barrie, First Nations people, staff, members of council, and MOE representatives. On June 29, 2010, the county approved the recommendation to accept the strategy. And I do have a few copies of it. It is on the website, but this finally, after many years, is a waste management strategy that was accepted. Are there improvements that needed in it? Probably. Should it happen faster? Probably. And we hope that that will happen. In future, we need to ensure the political process works for the community. We need to weigh the sensitivity of material carefully and ensure that only truly sensitive material, human, contractual, legal issues, is dealt with in camera only. We can't underrate the knowledge of those who raise concerns and their grasp of the issues. If the science is sound, we can't be afraid to have it openly questioned and examined. We need to take the time to explain it so that it's understood. The public is never too naive to understand the science. We have to be proactive rather than reactive, collaborative rather than defensive. When public committees such as the Community Monitoring Committee are established as a vehicle for information exchange between government and the public, time must be taken to help them do the intended job. We can't be critical and disparaging of participants who raise concerns, trying to discredit their credentials, their convictions, and their character. If people feel they've been treated like fools, fed with platitudes rather than facts by an arrogant and paternalistic bureaucracy, they can be expected to become confrontational. We have to be responsive, patient, considerate, and respectful. We have to listen, truly listen, with the intent to understand. We need communication that is open and transparent, not summarized and sanitized. Ray did mention to you that there are a number of handouts that the county had sent down for this. There's a fact sheet, a brief history on the county's assumption of waste management sites. The mod flow, I didn't get into that because I'm sure there's other speakers that may, and they've got information on what that is. This is a new newsletter that will be coming out in October. Recycling really adds up information on the waste management program from the county, which will be distributed to everybody. There is a few copies of a press kit here, and it does have some further information in it. So that concludes my speech. Questions?